Greetings and welcome to Talk a Little, Learn a Lot, the American Society of Naval Engineers podcast. I am your host, Stephen Phillips. In this podcast, we talk a little and learn a lot about naval engineering while inspiring the next generation of STEM professionals. This is episode 50. It's amazing to think that there have been 50 episodes. Today, I'm joined by three guests, one returning guest and two new guests, to discuss shipbuilding. I'm going to ask each of them the same 5 questions. I think what you'll hear is some great insight and wisdom through their answers. Of note, we recorded this before and on the day of the Acting Secretary of the Navy's announcement and subsequent publication of the U.S. Navy Shipbuilding Plan of May 2026. So this was not discussed, nor did its content influence our discussion. Perhaps we will discuss that plan later in a future episode. So as you listen, you'll note that I begin with the Honorable Nickolas Guertin, who has been on the show before. I then interview Vice Admiral Bill Galinis and Rear Admiral Jason Lloyd in their first appearances on Talk a Little, Learn a Lot. I interviewed each of them separately, but again, asked them the same 5 questions about shipbuilding. And so the Honorable Nickolas Guertin, welcome back, sir.
Well, thanks very much for having me on again. I really appreciate it. I had a great time the last couple of times we had a chance to chat like this. Quick background on me for those in the audience who might not remember me. I was most recently the Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Research, Development, and Acquisition, ostensibly the Service Acquisition Executive for the Navy and Marine Corps, in a most amazing job. And before that, I was the Director for Operational Test and Evaluation. And then I did academia for a little while with Carnegie Mellon Software Engineering Institute and spent a career as a Navy civil servant working on combat systems, weapons, and I was also a Navy Reserve engineering duty officer doing ship repair and construction. So all of that experience primed me very well for my last job, but I'm back in the private sector and eager to share my thoughts on issues of the day.
Fantastic. And indeed, it was my privilege, sir, to have you on Talk a Little, Learn a Lot twice before. I interviewed you once in person at George Mason University during one of our events, and then once before like this via Zoom. And so as I prompted before we met, I'm going to ask 5 questions about shipbuilding. So let's get into it. The first one is there an argument to return to shipbuilding in public shipyards?
You know, that's a question that isn't getting asked very much these days. However, I read a really good book a few years ago on what was the role of the public shipyards during World War II and that fantastic ramp up to production that we had as a nation. And the synergy between the public yards and the private yards, the learning that happened in the public yards that was able to be transferred to the private sector helped them be more productive. And there was certainly, we have the Kaiser yards and Liberty ships and all that, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about complex naval vessels that were not just pump them out like Pez. There was more of a group of buys, a group of ships, and there was learning that went on between the two elements of the ecosystem that was highly synergistic, and one can hardly argue that it wasn't effective because the results were eye-watering.
Second question, sir, is the answer to our shipbuilding challenge found in startups?
The challenge with startups in shipbuilding, especially for combatant ships, is that those kinds of ships it's a long-term game. Startups have a tendency to be funded with private capital, and they're looking for a shorter-term return. Now, we are seeing some very interesting things happening in the unmanned vessel space, but those are comparatively simpler ships to build. The mission systems aren't as tightly integrated. They don't have to deal with people. So the design build cycle time is much shorter, and the opportunities to turn the corner on production and generate profit um, can be done inside the business cycle that private capital needs to have based on that kind of market dynamic. So um, shipbuilding, maybe not so much, but if you could compartmentalize unmanned vessels, that seems to be working pretty well.
Third question, do we keep building Burke-class destroyers?
Absolutely. 100%. We do not stop until we're building something else. This is something that I really lament about how the Navy has a tendency to change its mind after saying, we won't change our mind. We have said to the shipbuilders that are producing those ships, don't worry, we're not going to do a DDG 1000 or a Seawolf or a Constellation. We're going to keep building those things until we have something else for you to do. For a while, it was DDGX. There's been talk lately about Battleship, whatever. We still need a large surface combatant that has the room to grow and the ability to carry more capacity and capability that can evolve over time. The Arleigh Burkes are it's kind of like going to a full hotel, right? There's no room left at the end. And they're amazing ships, but they're packed tight and they're not cheap or easy to build. But if we stretch them out, make them bigger, make more room, make more modular capacity change possible as a part of the life cycle of the ship, yeah, we should do that. As soon as we have something on the drawing board that those shipbuilders can execute, we should not change building Arleigh Burkes until we have something else for them to do.
Question 4, can you tell me about a shipbuilding challenge that's not receiving enough attention?
Well, that's really hard to say because shipbuilding's receiving a lot of attention these days, and which is awesome. The maritime um, strategy that the White House put out and maritime action plan um, is really I'm super excited about that. There's a lot of moving parts to that. I mean, borrowed extensively from um, the Ships for America Act, which is fine. Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, as they say. But now it's time to go from talk to action. So the next shipbuilding challenge that's not receiving enough attention is, where is the money? Where are the resources that we need to stand up new shipbuilding environments and actually produce ships? And it's going to require some federal engagement because private industry by itself is not going to step into the very large physical plant laydown that's necessary to build complex ships like surface combatants. If you don't mind, I'm just going to opine just a little bit more. Over the course of the past, let's say 40 years, we have not had a level playing field when it comes to U.S. shipbuilders for maritime in the global market for maritime ships. Some nations have spent lavishly of their public resources on the physical plant necessary to do ship construction. We decided to be a more laissez-faire, invisible hand, let the market figure it out. Well, the market doesn't figure it out if someone else in the market is basically spending public resources to put themselves in an unfair competitive position. We let that happen. I'm not going to go much further on that, just to say that we need to use some public dollars to establish the infrastructure so private industry can come in, execute, be excellent, and deliver ships that are needed by the nation. Because let's face it, 90% of our goods come here by sea. We should have U.S. flagged ships with U.S. crews.
The fifth and last question, sir. If you were asked to brief a member of Congress on how to best improve shipbuilding, what would you tell them?
I'm going to take you back to your first question. And that is, what is the role of shipbuilding in public yards? And I would counsel them to look at it more as an enterprise problem, that the public environment can be that steady force that plugs through the valleys and the hills, that is that steady resource of knowledge and skill that industry can come and leverage so that when it's time to ramp up, when it's time to build more and flow those resources to the private sector so they can do that work, they've got somebody to lean on. We have the technical authority teams now at Naval Sea Systems Command and some of our Navy laboratories, which I've worked at myself in the past. They're great people, but they are not skilled in actually doing shipbuilding. They watch it all the time, but they don't do it. They also aren't scaled to the size of being able to do ship construction and be that gap filler, that team that gets through the valleys so that we can excel during the peaks. So I would say that it's time to establish a new public ship production yard. I don't think we can do that with our existing public yards. It's my personal opinion, happy to be wrong, but they're up to their eyeballs in work for maintaining, especially nuclear submarines and aircraft carriers. And they're challenged to keep pace with that work. There's been some very good results recently, especially at Norfolk Naval Shipyard. They've done some on-time deliveries. I'm very excited about that. But they're oversubscribed for repair. What would be valuable at this point in our nation's history is to stand up a new public yard singularly focused at construction. Maybe nuclear construction. I wouldn't necessarily limit to that. Probably do some analysis and figure out where the edges of that curve are. But and the other thing about that is shipbuilding and ship repair, even though they're adjacent, they're different. Shipbuilding is optimized to the flow of material into a completed product. Ship repair is optimized toward the flow out of material, repair and flow into material in an already built and sealed up hull. They're different, a lot different. The management, the flow, the skills, it's not realistic to think, I don't think it's probably not optimal to say that ship repair and ship construction are so alike that you can do one and the other and it's just fine. I think at this point, we should consider a new public yard singularly focused at helping the nation's private shipbuilders put our nation in a better place for doing maritime and naval ship construction.
Vice Admiral Bill Galinis. Bill, thank you for joining me on the podcast. I look forward to this discussion.
Yeah, Steve, thanks very much for the opportunity to participate in this. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
Bill, would you start by introducing yourself to the Talk a Little, Learn a Lot audience?
Yeah. So again, thanks for the opportunity to be here. Retired from the Navy just over 2 years ago now after a 40-year plus career. Just extremely fortunate to work with just a number of great individuals during my time in the Navy. Started off as a surface warfare officer, transitioned into the engineering duty officer community, had the opportunity to work in ship design, ship construction, fleet maintenance activities. Again, just working with a tremendous team there across all three of those different enterprises, and finished my time with the Navy as the 45th commander of the Naval Sea Systems Command. So again, just very fortunate to have the opportunities that I did while on active duty with the Navy. So thanks.
So the first question, is there an argument to return to shipbuilding in public shipyards?
Yeah, that's a great question, Steve. And I know it's kind of been brought up off and on again in a number of different forums. I would tell you, from my perspective and my experience in working with the four public shipyards at this point, the answer to that would be no. And the reason I say that is for a couple couple of ways here. Number one, first, I think probably most in this audience understand, ship construction and ship maintenance are really two completely different enterprises, right? And just kind of the way the work is planned, the way it's scheduled, the changes that occur during execution. And so it's just a little bit it's different. And so, I think our public yards right now are really tuned for ship maintenance, principally, again, as most folks probably know, in the nuclear sector on our nuclear vessels, submarines, and aircraft carriers. And, we need our public yards to be good at that. And so, not that we have any surge capability, but if we were able to kind of develop that surge capability, I think we'd want that in the public yards. There continues to be, I would say, an ongoing discussion about do we need a fifth public shipyard to kind of help, especially in the submarine maintenance world. And there's pros and cons to doing that. But in terms of trying to bring ship construction back into our public naval shipyards, I would argue that that is not at this point probably a prudent path to take.
Is the answer to our shipbuilding challenge found in startups?
I would say a lot, yes, it absolutely could be. And if you look at some of the company, and when you talk about a startup, a lot of times you'll think about a small company, very agile, maybe focused in high tech and areas. But I would maybe expand that definition right now to some of the companies that we're seeing emerging on the in the defense sector. Okay, companies like Anduril, like Saronic, like Palantir. Okay, that really have grown and grown relatively quickly with private funding. And I want to talk a little bit more about that, but and these companies have raised a substantial amount of money, where to the point where they're buying or developing, I'll say, ship or maritime production facilities, okay, across the country. And so, they're working their way into really kind of the ship construction sector in some very interesting ways. I think, at least initially, a lot of their focus was kind of on the autonomous systems, focus really on the defense sector. But I see where some of the work that they're doing could translate into the commercial shipbuilding sector. Okay. And I want to talk about commercial shipbuilding more as we get further into this, because that I think is an important part of the reestablishment and the rebuilding of our maritime industrial base. But companies like Anduril, like Saronic, and I've got no inside baseball insight into what these companies are thinking strategically, not working with or for any of these companies, but just what I read kind of in the open press and some of the discussions that I've had with different folks and everything like that. I think they're really kind of building an ecosystem underneath the major shipyards that we have today that could kind of come on scene and hopefully help us with the challenges that we have in rebuilding our shipbuilding capacity here in the United States. So I think, again, back, the short answer to your question here, absolutely, startups, can be part of the solution. I think you're going to see that as we go forward here in relatively short order.
The third question is, do we keep building Burke-class destroyers?
Yeah, I think we do in the near term, okay? But again, as many in your audience, Steve, will be familiar with, the size and the volume on the Burkes were quickly, that's quickly expiring for us in many ways, right? And as we transition from the flight twos to the flight 2As to the flight threes, that really took a lot of I'll say graduate level ship design work to upgrade the power system, get the right stability, meet the right stability requirements for the ship. As we added that additional radar, the new SPY-6 radar capacity and whatnot that we have there. So there's a lot of good yes, I think we need to continue to build the Berks, but I think the weapon size, especially as we transition, we start looking at hypersonic weapons. We're going to need to transition to a larger hull form. Okay, a lot of discussion about the battleship. There's a lot of smart folks that are kind of working on that, and looking at kind of what's in the realm of the possibility, and how big that ship really needs to be to meet the mission requirements. The Navy will set the requirements appropriately for that size platform. We'll see how that evolves over time. But I think in terms of a frontline major surface combatant, I do think the next version of that is going to be larger than the Arleigh Burks. But in the near term, the Burke is a very capable platform. I think we're all watching what those ships are doing over in the Middle East right now. And it is a very capable platform, and we'll continue to use that platform for many years to come.
Bill, can you tell me about a shipbuilding challenge that's not receiving enough attention?
Yeah, so I think a lot's been discussed and written about rebuilding um, the U.S. shipbuilding sector. Um, I think a piece of that we really probably need to start talking more about is the commercial shipbuilding element of that. Okay. And the Maritime Action Plan that was released by the White House a few months back, I think kind of gets into that. I think it's a well-written document. Um, I would argue in some areas it probably doesn't go far enough in terms of really kind of getting into kind of what is actionable to rebuild um, our commercial shipbuilding sector, which I think is almost foundational, Steve, to rebuilding our overall shipbuilding in the maritime sector. Okay, and a couple of points there, right? So when you start thinking about a new part of the shipbuilding sector, what are really kind of the key elements that we're working, looking to build? So it starts, I think, really at the national level, at the organization. Okay. I would argue that we seriously need to consider a cabinet level position in the maritime sector. Okay. Similarly, we have commerce, we have agriculture, um, transportation. Maritime, I think, is becoming just that important that it warrants a cabinet level position. Okay. And the reason I say that is there would be an opportunity to bring a lot of these disparate organizations and some of the work that they're doing, everything from, workforce development, both building ships as well as operating ships. Okay. There's a lot of training opportunities across the country, but I will tell you, at least from my humble opinion, not very well integrated in some ways. Okay, so I think there's an opportunity there. So I think kind of a national level, a cabinet level position in the maritime to help kind of really give that sector the horsepower, if you will, that it needs. Okay. Um, the second piece is you need a funding stream. Okay. I would argue that funding stream cannot be from the federal budget that gets passed every year or every year and a half. Okay, however that works, right? But the point is, it can't all be federal dollars, right? So we've got to look for, alternate investment streams, okay, to do that. I think the discussion on you know, maybe there's a portion of tariffs, okay, that can help with this. Maybe there's a portion of charges for ships that are built overseas to kind of help start building this. And there's private money, okay, that come into this. So and again, we talked about some of the startups before. A lot of those companies have grown using private money, right? And they're private companies, okay. And so I think bringing more companies like that online with different funding streams that are not just solely focused on on federal money, right? I mean, if you go to companies like South Korea or Japan, or even China, right? I mean, they have different economic models over there in terms of how they do this with government subsidies. Okay, And that may be an element of what we're doing here. There may be a government, but it can't solely be focused on government funding. And then the third part is somewhat related to this is we do need more shipyards. Okay. We absolutely need more shipyards. And again, I kind of talked about some of the work that I believe, Andrew and Saronic and others are getting into, but there's other efforts out there right now to develop, property in areas where you can build a shipyard to build large ocean-going vessels, okay? And whether those are manned vessels, unmanned or optionally manned or fully autonomous vessels, the ability to build those large ocean-going vessels, um, there are limited shipyards that can do that right now, okay? And so we need to expand those sites. We need to expand those facilities. And the other thing I would argue is that, the facilities required to build a nuclear power submarine are probably a little bit more than what you would need to build a commercial ocean going, bulk container ship or freighter or something along those lines. Okay. So there's different levels of facilities there, I think, to help rebuild the commercial piece. And then the final element, and again, a lot's been written and talked about on this is the workforce. And, how do you develop a workforce in those particular areas? Where are you going to establish these shipyards? I think, ship construction is a labor-intensive effort, but there are ways technology can help. Advanced manufacturing technologies can help to remove man hours and people out of the ship construction process. Okay, and I would also argue that I think you look at some of what some of our allied partners are doing. Okay, South Korea, Hanwha, the purchase of the Philadelphia yard. I see that potentially as a company that wants to get more involved in U.S. ship construction here in the United States. I think there's a lot to be said for that, and some of the good lessons learned, okay, to help do that. So when you talk about things that are not receiving enough attention, it's really kind of focused on rebuilding the commercial fleet. And I kind of laid out a couple of the elements there to do that. The other piece that I would offer, I think, a little bit, and this applies to the military sector as well as the commercial sector. What drives industry, right? And so, the military, you're kind of how many ships, does the Navy buy every year? And there's been a lot of good work done on that to kind of show. One of my colleagues, Tom Moore, wrote a really good article on this probably almost a year ago now for Proceedings that kind of talked about, hey, back in the 80s timeframe, we were building 4 submarines a year per se, for the LA class submarines, right? And now we're trying to get back to 1.2 or 2 plus to get 2 attack boats on a ballistic missile submarines, right? So, we've had that capacity in the past. I think we can get back there. But but how do you do that? There needs to be kind of a level of competition. This is where I say kind of new shipyards, new players coming onto the scene can kind of help do that. Okay. Incentives, what incentivizes a company? I mean, a publicly traded company is incentivized differently than a private company. Okay. So, most of our major defense contractors right now are publicly traded companies, and they've got a, set of criteria that, they've got shareholders that they, respond to. Private companies maybe a little bit different, right, in terms of how they do business, right? And then, we talked about kind of how do you take those two different companies, those two different business models, bring those into the commercial sector a little bit. So those are some things, Steve. I think it's a great question. I think those are some of the things from my perspective that I think we should be talking a little bit more about. Yep.
And the last question, if you were asked to brief a member of Congress on how to best improve shipbuilding, what would you tell them?
Yeah, I mean, how to best improve shipbuilding. Certainly, budget stability, I think, is probably number one. I mean, that's probably the one thing that Congress has, their fingerprint on, their hand on the wheel, if you will, to provide that that stability. The the other thing I do think again is kind of back to what I talked about in terms of reinvigorating commercial shipbuilding and maybe taking a step back, looking more holistically at the national level. In terms of what do we have nationally for a maritime organization? What other funding streams can be brought into play here to help with that? How do you incentivize companies, investment funds, people like that to kind of get into the shipbuilding world? And then I think the workforce is a key part of that. There's been a lot talked about how we design and build ships. I don't think that's something Congress should get into. New technologies. But again, there's got to be, for the shipbuilders we have today, there's got to be an incentive to make that change, right? What would incentivize them to bring in a new technology to take man hours or reduce costs out of a ship, right? I mean, our shipbuilders generally kind of work on that, but maybe there's other ways to kind of think about that. Training of the workforce, both, ship construction workforce, as well as the operators, I think is important. But again, that's something maybe for Congress, but that cabinet level piece that I talked about. So that's kind of a short answer to that one, Steve.
Rear Admiral Jason Lloyd. Jason, thank you, sir, for joining me on the podcast. I look forward to this discussion.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Stephen. Appreciate it.
Jason, would you please introduce yourself to the Talk a Little, Learn a Lot audience?
Sure. Thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity. I retired in the Navy from the Navy as NAV 05 in 2024. Before that, I was first reactor officer on Gerald R. Ford, had command of supervisor shipbuilding in Newport News. And during my time in the Navy, had a real passion for helping rebuild the maritime industrial base. I've carried that over into my new job. I am now Vice President of Maritime Engineering and Design for Total Tech. Doing a lot with companies behind the scenes to advance the industrial base. And I'm on the board of directors for Velo 3D Metal Additive Manufacturing, trying to help propel the fourth industrial revolution.
Right on. So, to the first question. Is there an argument to return to shipbuilding in public shipyards?
Yeah, hey, great question. So I don't think so, for two reasons. The first one, the public shipyards of today have zero experience in shipbuilding. Their experiences in reactor and propulsion plant repairs and modernization for submarines and aircraft carriers. The facilities they have and the footprint and processes are very different for repair modernization than it is for new construction. So I think number one, it would take a long time for them to get back up on par in the shipbuilding area. The next reason, the public shipyards are the nation's strategic assets for keeping aircraft carriers and submarines in accordance with their class maintenance plans, because the number of ships really doesn't matter. It's the number of ships that can go do their mission, right? And we've been having a hard time keeping submarines out at sea and getting those turned around on time. And aircraft carriers were doing better. But if you go insert shipbuilding into there, you take away from their what I consider to be a vital mission of keeping nuclear powered ships at sea. So no, I don't think that there's a valid argument to be made for returning that.
Is the answer to our shipbuilding challenge found in startups?
So I'll answer with yes and. I don't think there's a single solution to our shipbuilding challenge. I think there are a lot of solutions. Our shipbuilding and ship repair capacity in the United States depends on, in my opinion, jump-starting the fourth industrial revolution. This includes smarter ways of structuring and executing work. So electronic workflows, having all manufacturing systems tied together, new ways of manufacturing, additive, powder metallurgy, hot isostatic pressing, different ways of supporting the fact, when the Berlin Wall fell and we didn't build things. We became a nation of service and not manufacturing supremacy. We lost a lot of blue collar capabilities. We lost places in the supply chain to make castings, forgings, that kind of stuff. And so there are different ways of manufacturing, and we have to adopt them. That's not to replace castings and forgings, but we have to adopt new manufacturing processes. I talk about additive manufacturing with people, and I say, if you go back to the last time we took a major new manufacturing process, it was the beginning of World War II, and it was welding instead of riveting. We made 2,700 Liberty ships over a 4-year period in World War II by expanding a different type of capacity, a different way of thinking. And so I think startups are perfect in those areas because they think differently. They get us out of our conventional ways of thinking with the way way we've always done things. And so I think you've got to it has to be yes and it has to be all of that stuff together, as well as what the Navy's doing right now with ATDM and reestablishing trades, reestablishing manufacturing, blue collar work as a honorable thing, and returning us to the manufacturing supremacy that we had in World War II.
Do we keep building Burke class destroyers?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we build Burke class destroyers because number one, they're good ships, and number two, we're good at it, and we've got it. We've built a lot of them, right? Uh, but the real question is for the Navy. Not for. In my opinion, I don't know enough about the threat anymore. Right, the threat has changed since the 2 years I was in, and what you have to look at is the threat in 10, 15 years. A Burke class destroyer that we're building now, right, may not be able to effectively take down the threat in 10, 15 years. And so you've got the Navy has to look at that, and the Navy has to look at balancing, hey, what new threats, such as the proliferation of hypersonics, what is going to take those out, right? And what is going to protect us? And so um, we got to be careful of being the battleship admirals, right? That continue to build battleships just because that's what we've always done, and not make that that step into the next weapon system, whatever that is. So I think it really has to be defined by the threat and what is the most cost effective way to spend the taxpayer dollars to eliminate future threats.
Can you tell me about a shipbuilding challenge that is not receiving enough attention?
Yeah, that's a great question. I am extremely impressed with the progress that's been made in the last couple of years with recognizing how huge of a problem we have in our maritime industrial base. I think we're doing a good job. I think there is way more to do. Absolutely, way more to do. We have to make the kids coming out of grade school, they have to be thinking about being in manufacturing. It doesn't necessarily be a welder or an electrician, but the experts that operate CNC machines, the experts that operate additive manufacturing machines, all of these things that are coming about, we have to grow our workforce such that maritime trades are sought after and wanted and valued as much as they were before. And so, although I think we're doing a good job uh, getting there, I think we need to instill more. A sense of urgency. If you go back to the 1940 with Franklin Roosevelt and his speech on establishing the arsenal of democracy, I think we're there again. And I think we have to do that. We have to focus as a nation on getting back the manufacturing capacity that we had. We can't outsource the building of our ships to China. And that's the path we've basically gone down, is doing a lot of outsourcing of all of our manufacturing capacity.
Last question. If you were asked to brief a member of Congress on how to best improve shipbuilding, what would you tell them?
Yeah, another great question. And everybody is. I'm a firm believer that everybody wakes up in the morning wanting to do a good job, and so they're all generally good people trying to do the best they can. I think we, all of us, including Congress, need to focus on doing the best job that we can to return the United States to where it was from a manufacturing capacity again, and shipbuilding to where we were in the 1940s. I think everybody needs to focus on that. And so I think Congress's piece, just to be frank, we have not had a DoD portion of the president's budget authorized on schedule since 1997. Next year will be 30 years. And regardless of who understands it or not, if you've been in that acquisition process, it is extremely wasteful to play political uh, roulette with the DoD budget. And so I think Congress and the president, everybody needs to focus on getting a budget approved on time so that the Navy can focus on its job of taking that budget, and the Navy and the DoD, Department of War, sorry, I keep forgetting that one, but so that they can do their job of using that part of the budget to effectively use the taxpayer dollars and keep the United States where we need to be.
And so thank you, gentlemen, for taking this time to discuss 5 questions about shipbuilding. I hope that we can welcome you back in the future to Talk a Little, Learn a Lot, the podcast of the American Society of Naval Engineers.